Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on the MDRC project. I'm Daniel Vasquez, Senior Standard Specialist with the U.S. Agency for International Development. I'm responsible for the Standards Alliance initiative, that is the initiative under which we have the MDRC. MDRC starts for Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project, a project that we created with AdvaMed in 2020. So it already has been around for a little while. This project is a public-private partnership that we're proud to have with our partners, the American National Standards Institute, and with AdvaMed. It has been certainly a very productive initiative, and it was designed to address and eliminate COVID-19 regulatory, especially focus on standards-related issues, customs-related bottlenecks that were preventing and still prevent medical technologies from reaching countries' points of care and patients. I want to make a pause here before we advance too much, and just to remind everybody that my agency, the U.S. Agency for International Development, is making a commitment in transforming the way that we provide technical assistance to countries. For those that aren't familiar with us, we are the agency that provides international cooperation on behalf of the American people. You can look at our programs in our website. But what we're trying to do is work closer with other stakeholders, including with the private sector, in the way that we design, conceive, and also deliver technical assistance. We're not trying to be the owners of all truth and just develop a project within the structure of our agency, but we want to talk to you and work on developing these initiatives that are based on approaches, on market-based approaches envisioned by the private sector and other stakeholders. So the MDRC is a very good example of the work that we are doing with this new focus. The purpose of this session today is going to take a more detailed overview of the work that we have been conducting with AdvaMed and the MDRC. We had a session earlier yesterday where we talked more on high level of what things were being advanced on regulatory convergence, but this is actually digging into what we are doing and the objectives of the program, as well as the achievements today and what is ambition for 2024. One of the unique aspects of the MDRC, as I mentioned, is that public-private partnership, but that public-private partnership also extends to the way in which we fund the initiative. We actually share the financial burden. We are 50-50 partners here. So we are also happy to see that it's a viable and productive and effective way in which we can provide technical assistance through this model that was created through a cooperative agreement, as we call it. The foundational work of the MDRC standards, but you cannot actually look at standards in a vacuum. You also need to go look at it at the foundational aspects of good regulatory practices, regulatory convergence, and obviously this includes regulatory impact assessment and the use of international standards and how countries use those standards for developing their own regulatory systems. We do believe that as we help countries address these bottlenecks and help them implement international standards. We are helping them with their compliance with WTO agreements on technical barriers to trade, but also we are helping them in the implementation of the good health guidance that is provided by the World Health Organization on regulatory reliance and recognition. So far, the MDRC partner countries have made important advancements. I'm sure that we're going to listen here on some interesting results, and we're very optimistic that the project is going to reach and hopefully surpass the goals that have been set for this project by the end of 2024. Thank you for those that are going to be presenting today. Thank you to our partner countries that are joining us today, and also to the partner organizations like FDA that have joined the efforts under the MDRC. And with that, I'll pass it over to our wonderful moderator, Sandra Ligia Gonzalez of the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence.
Daniel, thank you very much. And I'm really going to try not to bore you this afternoon speaking a lot. So we're going to really have all of our speakers sharing what the wonderful work that has been done through the project and in several geographies. So just for all of you attending in here, the sound in the room is going to be in the original language that the presentations are going to be delivered. So presentations from Colombia, you're going to be listening to them in the room in Spanish. So if you want to gain access to the interpretation in English, please use the link that you received while you registered, and please use your earphones and have your computers muted so we will not disturb the sound. So we're going to get started. FDA is going to be joining us momentarily. They're running late in another session. So we're going to get started in a little bit different order as what was originally planned. We're going to start with Colombia, and we will start with Susan Suarez, who, as you all already know, is the liaison of the MDRC project for Colombia. And she's going to be sharing us kind of like an overview of what is this about, what we have been done. And then we will get into the details from the Ministry of Health in the role of regulators and INVIMA as the vigilant agency in the country, the health agency in the country. So Susan, please, if you can join us.
Thank you. Can you hear me here? Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity of sharing the Colombia results with all of you. I will now proceed to introduce what we have done in Colombia, the methodology we used, and some of the learned lessons throughout the process, due to the fact that the details of each project are going to be presented by Ministry of Health and INVIMA after my presentation. The phase 2, as you see on the screen, of the alliance began in May 2020 and has been developed in 2 phases. The first one, the preparation phase, which ran on September 2021, for which the government prioritized needs in which we have been advising them. The first 4, as you see, were agreed since the beginning: emergency use authorizations, clinical research, assistance to implement MDSAP model, to implement good regulatory practices on the process, and finally, assistance to advance on the exposed evaluation in 2 decrees, 4725 and 3770, which are the core, the structural regulation regarding medical devices and in vitro diagnostic reagents in Colombia. The last 2, 5 and 6, were prioritized at the end of the year: good manufacturing practices, processes and procedures that I will explain after, and the ex-ante evaluation on the same decrees. After that, government, MDRC, and the industry delegated working groups to work together on that. And finally, we trained 389 people on 5 workshops. Next, please. The second phase in which we have progressed has been in the last 11 months, and we have had 182 meetings with 971 attendances represented by 68 attendees. That means that if we had had different people in all the meetings, we would have had meetings with 971 people. On the other hand, most of them have been women, 65%. And of course, the majority has been represented by Ministry of Health, INVIMA, which is the sanitary authority in Colombia. DMP is the leader of the regulatory improvement policy in Colombia. Ministry of Health, Ministry of Commerce, DAFP, which is the entity responsible for providing guidelines on public participation in the production of the regulation. And finally, ECONTEC with 1%, 0.1%. And ECONTEC is the National Standardization Organization for Technical Standards. Next one, please. Regarding methodology, we started with a preparatory phase in which we identified all guidelines, tools, decrees developed by the Colombian government regarding good manufacturing practices. And we also had meetings with DMP, which is the lead, as I told you, of the regulatory improvement policy in Colombia, in order to agree our work with the Ministry of Health. And also we had meetings with the Ministry of Health to agree on the agenda to follow. After that, we suggested not only some additional steps, but also some guidelines or some tools for methodologies to apply during the process. On the other hand, throughout the process, due to the fact that in the case of the decrees, they had to start with ex-post evaluation to evaluate how the results of the implementation are. And in the other cases, I mean, emergency use authorization, clinical research, and good manufacturing practices, they had to start with the ex-ante evaluation to identify the current problem that the country is having about the topic, analyze the ways to solve the problem, and choose the best one to continue with the regulation. During the process, we have had the opportunity of both guiding the government on how to implement good regulatory practices, but also the opportunity of carrying out specific activities, such as in the case of ex-ante evaluation, providing support on identifying the problems, causes, and consequences that we are currently having in Colombia on each issue, and on the design of the documents which supports them with the necessary data to justify them. Suggesting institutional alignment on key concepts. And for that, the Colombian government have had some meetings with other national entities so that the team understands the mutual recognition procedures before identifying the alternatives to solve the problems with the regulation. As you know, mutual recognition means that through multilateral agreements, accreditation bodies recognize the equivalence of their services, which prevents tests or certifications from being issued more than once. All that is necessary to analyze in the best way to regulate some issues and to realize the benefits of having that, reducing unnecessary duplication of regulatory requirements. Third, designing tools for identifying the alternatives which guarantee that the government are reviewing international standards, but also costs and benefits of each alternative and variables to analyze which is the best one, to be aware of the cost of duplication of efforts. In the case of ex-post evaluations, interviewing regulators and stakeholders who participated in the formulation of the decrees 15 years ago, the government didn't have one issue that they had to have. So we help them to identify the problems that the regulators aim to solve with the regulation, with that decrease, so that the government could have the principal issues to start with the exposed evaluation. Second, design tools which allow the government to identify the inputs, processes, procedures, and outputs that they went through to follow the decrease and to decide and select which part is going to be evaluated. Supporting the design of the questionnaire to be solved on the evaluation, which also includes the evaluation of institutional capacity. This is really important because the government not only has to advance on technical issues, but also they should evaluate if they have the institutional capacity to ensure the compliance of the rules. And to define the best, in order to define the best regulation model and the benefits of the regulatory convergence, but also the benefits of reliance that some way are related with the capacity of the entities. Supporting the design of instruments to be applied to stakeholders to obtain information, and finally, supporting the analysis to identify the most appropriate methodology to advance on each evaluation, and also how to conduct public consultation to involve stakeholders in the process and to improve the transparency on it. Next one, please. Besides supporting the Colombian government on the implementation of GRP for specific regulation projects, and being sure that one of the means to help a country is by identifying its structural problems, we proposed working on the design of an instrument which allows the Ministry of Health to ensure compliance with the regulatory improvement policy and TVT requirements. Even though the government has tools, guidelines, regulations regarding GRP, there wasn't really an instrument that brought together all of them. And as a consequence, the Ministry of Health had a high risk of not meeting the national and international requirements. So we suggested working together on it. And after 9 months, the Ministry of Health has an instrument approved called Procedures and Processes, which is the most robust tool nowadays in Colombia, and the only one that was developed with the participation not only of the Ministry of Health, but also DMP, that as I told you, is the entity, the leader of the regulatory improvement policy in Colombia, and with Ministry of Commerce and with a public function department. Moreover, this tool incorporates national and international requirements and recommendations supported on best practices, OECD and World Health Organization. And finally, this procedure will be the basis for DMP to incorporate it in their toolbox to be implemented at national and local entities in the whole country. We will have impact on at least 1,000, 3,000 regulatory entities throughout the country. Marta Lievano is going to explain this tool next. Next one, please. And finally, on lessons learned. In the short term, being close to the government allows them to have guidance on what to do and the facilities to implement the activities. For example, the documents that we have translated into Spanish, methodologies to identify the correct problem, identify the importance of analyzing institutional capacity, all the work that I explained before. And those activities mitigate the risk of not meeting national and international requirements and not to improve their level of maturity in terms of good regulatory practices. And in the long term, in my opinion, one of the most important achievements of the MDRC in Colombia is to obtain an impact on the DNA of regulatory practices of the government, with the creation of tools with a permanent vocation. We have already identified one of them, and we are very happy with the fact that Colombia has approved that tool, and that is because we proposed them to work on it, And of course, the government was willing to do so. But we want to go further. And for that, we have to think about how to develop or propose other tools as impact calculators, how to advance in actions to improve their institutional architecture, to ensure that there is a specialized and responsible group to advance in that, and not just people who only sometimes have to deal with these issues. In conclusion, I have to end with something that we must not forget. The regulatory improvement goes through the will not only of the governments, but also of the people who materialize this will. And this will is often transformed when the teams understand not only the concept, but also the way it is materialized. And on the other hand, industry must also advance in understanding the importance of participating in these issues. In the case of Colombia, we must recognize that the interinstitutional work between the regulator and the health agency has been exceptional, and that the capacity of the teams to implement the concept is becoming more and more evident. And of course, we hope it continue like this. And in the other hand, the industry must continue to work to make participation more and more permanent in order to produce a standard in Colombia. Thank you. Now, after we are going to share with Oscar Marie. So Oscar, Ministry of Health, please can you continue? Thank you. Tienes el micrófono cerrado. ¿Nos escuchas? Es en mute. Sí, estás. Cuando quieras puedes presentar compartir tu pantalla.
To my start, you can share your screen at any time. Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to share this presentation with you this afternoon. Susana gave us a wonderful introduction of what we've been doing, what kind of activities we've been holding around this regulatory convergence project. This afternoon, I just want to touch upon a couple of subjects and issues on the things we have made progress on. This is not new. We have been working on this partnership since 2017, 2019, where we had the first phase where we were able to set the foundations for cooperations. So that was the foundational work. And then the partnership for convergence, I would say the most widely participating was Avima, but we were looking at this. But in 2021, we started stage 2, which started with some activities basically focusing on training and raising awareness in the teams. And we didn't know much about the achievements in the first stage. And so we worked on further raising awareness, the ISO 13485, MDRC, and some standards for medical devices. We also had identifying nomenclature of medical devices that was not directly a part of the project, but that was something we've been doing. So against this background and with these activities, we continued working not only from the ministry, but also collecting and identifying the needs we had with our regulatory body, INVIMA, INVIMA. So we determined what we want to get from this process and from the new phase of the convergence project. Number one, it was implementation of good practices, which we will hear more about, but this is what we defined as priority in the ministry. It was ex post evaluation and the work done on this decrease, 4725 and 3770. As I mentioned to you this morning, this decrease from regulatory system for medical devices. So it's partly on legislation, but they sit in between technical and medical, basically as contained in this decrease. This decrease go for, and right now, as you can see, this decrease have several years of implementation after being published. And they have resulted in good experience and the kind of things we want to keep as a part of the organizational and regulatory structure of our country. And then some other situations which we will see we want to keep. The authorization of emergency use. This is important. As I mentioned to you, we identified having technical regulations or the necessary conditions to use and authorize medical devices as a part of emergency situation so that there are not too many and we can start using them swiftly and starting focusing the efforts of a country instead of regulations on the activities to stop a contagion. Then another agreement was we need to work on two different fronts: good manufacturing practices and clinical research. We have been working on this separately because these include two work strands focusing on getting the implementation of regulations and good manufacturing practices, which is a priority right now for INVIMA, and that is something we have. And in this case, with the activities we had been doing during the pandemic, for example, for clinical research, I mean, we didn't do that, but we determined some of the regulations. It was such a massive pandemic that research protocols were not fulfilled the way they had to. And then for clinical research with medical devices. And I think it would be good to tell you a little bit about how this structure is composed. In Colombia, ex-ante evaluations are only applicable when there is a new regulation. And for the two decrees I mentioned, which have been enforced for 16 years. So the first thing we do is an ex post evaluation, a preliminary one. That means to say we review them and regulation objectives of those decrees 16 years ago. We make sure they were met and whether they had the conditions. So in this sense, Susan was explaining to you, we were to reconstruct this 16 years ago, because back then we did not speak about regulatory convergence, good regulatory practices, or anything of that kind. So we decided to do this thorough work to analyze the technical results and behavior of those regulations. But in reviewing these objectives, there was not a framework of causes or consequences to compare against and to do it in a structured fashion. This is what I was telling you. These are the two the regulatory decrees for technical development for in vitro. analysis that require an analysis, this type of analysis. Then we work on regulatory analysis ex ante and framework decrees. We have all three phases, but there was no regulation before. So we have this preliminary and ex ante. Regarding clinical research, we identified it's not a technical rule like other regulatory proposals. However, we identified that with the purpose of maintaining good clinical, want to solve causes and challenges in the pandemic. Right now, these are the results of implementation of this decrease, and we have been able to work by accompanying closely the reasons of this project, and we are working with the National Planning Department, DNP, for ex post and ex ante evaluations and the analysis of regulatory impact. We have designed a series of instruments to evaluate decrease.
Metodologías para capturar la información
So
necesaria.
we have built the methodologies to capture the necessary information to go with very specific data, which is what we are considering is necessary. We need this data, we need the metrics so that based on these projects, we can be able to deliver things. So we've done this decision tree based on the interviews done to people who worked on the regulation. We did the value chain, and we have prioritized products based on that, which are very important. Amongst them, we have the registries or permits, the marketing registries or permits, visits to see sanitary conditions. We have a techno surveillance program, and we believe that all of these have a huge impact. So those are the proposals that we built. And with that, we built an assessment with indicators that will support any decisions that will exist. So what we have is a validation of the design of that assessment. And what's going to come in next month is that to apply that assessment and then to be able to build the final document for the ex post assessment. Regarding the standard impact analysis, we have this with good manufacturing practices, clinical research, investigation, and the authorization of emergency use. Well, for those, we built also the issues decision tree for each one of these regulatory projects. Some of them, like the one for good manufacturing practices, it's already been published. The others are awaiting authorization to be published. We've worked already. I mean, we built a tool for good manufacturing practices where we had this information from the industry and that was directly involved with the regulations and the ones that are going to use that regulation. And we identified different options. You know, the first use is the use of ISO 13485. So we've worked with the National Accreditation Organization for Colombia to work on these things. And under these framework of what we have identified, we've identified how to apply those alternatives. And this is one of the first things that we are going to assess. And we've also designed variables to assess each one of those actions. Regarding the percentages that have been accomplished and how much progress we've made so far, I know that the percentages are not the best. You might see them there and think, oh my God, this is not good. But what we've seen and what we've done is that personally, we don't want to have additional load in the system right now. Why? And I tell you openly, well, because this has to be fully built and has to be adopted and learned by the whole institution. So it's not by somebody who just did that, it's a whole team and that has all of those capabilities, and they work on any different types of regulations. So right now we've started with the decrees to talk about the methodology, how to apply it, what we had, what we didn't have. We had to define what it was a cause, what was a consequence, if it was an issue, if it was an objective or not. Those type of things for us are very, very valuable. And so we are in total at a 63% of that ex post evaluation. But hopefully in the future, when we have to carry out these ex post evaluations of any other regulation, things will flow differently and a lot faster because we managed to build what was necessary. In the AIN, we've carried out 7%. We are just building the issues decision tree, and we have forecasted that the standard proposal will be ready for approval process by April of 2024. In ASUE, we are at 23% in building the objectives tree, and it's forecasted for November 2023. For clinical research, we have a panorama that's kind of similar to ASUE with 24% in the building of the tree, and it's forecasted by December 2023. And for good manufacturing practices, we've made 33% progress, and it's forecasted for December 2023. So as conclusions, I do understand that we want to highlight everything that we've done and all the work that we've carried out. But the first one and the most important one is the one that has to do with the sector, not only the health sector, but the regulatory sector, the good manufacturing practices, implementation sector, the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of Health, and all the health sector as a whole. So there we have the Ministry of Health and INVIMA. These have been the main keys for the activities that have been focused on clear objectives and that have the intention of making this much more efficient, for the state to be much more efficient, so that then we can do the right work and for us to be able to sit down and analyze why this exists and what is the good thing expected from this. I mean, sometimes you get frustrated, yes, because it's easier for us to issue a decree that say this is a requirement, that's it. But to go into it and have all the tools so that any stakeholder can come in and see, okay, this is the requirement I need to cover, and it has to be described as such, is quite useful. And it's something that we have changed and we have been embracing. And training, well, that helps the project a lot because we're able to understand what are the implementation perspective for the regulations in the region and how other countries have learned about this methodology. I have tried to do activities on this implementation, which is what we are working on, and also what are the results that we have obtained with Anvisa, with COFEPRIS, it's good to know that, and we value it a lot because we identify people that are doing similar things to what we are doing and that exists throughout the world. And the last point is sustainability. I think that it's a sustainability not only of the project, not only of the implementation of the dialogue and the conversations. The ministry, the health ministry requires this in all the work that's going to be done from now on. And good regulatory practices involve and include other type of things that are not the ministry's responsibility per se, but that are required to say, okay, I need these technical requirements or regulations that will ensure the quality and performance of the medical devices. But how can we do so? Well, that is what we are working on. And this is very important. We need for this to continue functioning in the way in which we have thought so far. So with that, thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Oscar, y le damos paso a Mabel Barbosa, representante de el
Thank you,
INVI.
Oscar, and we will pass the floor to Mabel Barbosa, representative of INVIMA, the Sanitary Authority. Go ahead, Mabel. Thank you very much and welcome. Thank you, Susan, and good afternoon, everybody. Once again, I want to share my screen with all of you.
Bueno, en este espacio me han pedido que les comente un poco.
So what they
acerca de la
asked for was,
participación del INVIMA
what they asked for was for me to participate in VIMA's participation at Colombia's Health Authority in this MDRC project. And well, in the slides I'm going to present, we're going to see some important participations that we've had. In 2017, we received the invitation to be part of this project. And back then, we received the information to participate in the same as a project that was trying to get and support the different governments so as to identify and implement good regulatory practices. That is how Colombia and INVIMA especially decided to be part of this phase in 2017. And in 2018, January of 2018 specifically, we were able to have a group of professionals to share and to develop a whole work plan, which we worked on for a whole week with the support of the project itself, so as to carry out different activities in the US. So we were actually visiting a factory for medical devices. This was specifically for orthopedic use and the osteosynthesis material. And we also visited a bank, a tissue bank, and we visited a hospital to see how they were reporting the events and incidents that were related to medical devices. We also had some work meetings with the Health Pan American Organization and the US Chamber of Commerce. And of course, we also had sessions with AdvaMed because they were kind enough to invite us and to connect us with the FDA, with whom we had a very important work session. That was in 2018, and that allowed us to go and start working on the identification of improvements for what we currently had in INVIMA at that moment. So that's where we had the need to talk about, okay, yes, we have to first work on things that have to do with the regulatory framework, because that was the main gap that we had identified so far, especially when we talk about good manufacturing practices, and also listening to the FDA. And after the whole balance of everything that we've done, we saw that there was a need to actively participate in the IMDRF work groups, specifically in the good regulatory practices group, and to raise the hand and to be the carriers or the presenters of that information in the region of the Americas, with INVIMA becoming one of the references as a sanitary agency. And that's the guide to follow in some of the countries in the region. We also saw that it was important to have a different focus than what we had in certification audits or the things that we had been managing so far. And especially, we had to take into consideration lessons learned and the experiences told by the FDA. And of course, we also participated in different seminars, which you have given us the opportunity to be part of and participate in them. And by our own initiative, we also decided to all of us who are working in the medical devices area to certify ourselves. We took a course, we trained, and we certified ourselves as auditors with an emphasis in ISO 13485. We also decided to become the leaders or the host for the work group in the region of the Americas that is heading the Pan American Health Organization in 2019. And internally, we also strengthened some of the technical aspects that we had, like the documents and the efficacy evaluation for medical devices, or the documents that are evaluators for sanitary registries use to grant the marketing authorizations for these medical devices. So right here, just to illustrate, we can see some images and some reminders of that first phase, of that first development. Here we have Steven, Sandra Ligia, and some of the other people who participated back then in phase 1. Now we are in phase 2.0, and it was motivated by COVID and other aspects. And with that, we are sharing the specific objectives of this phase 2.0 because we wanted to develop and align this regulatory frameworks in developing regulations so that countries like Colombia can improve their sanitary surveillance, obviously within this framework of standards. And that is why, as Oscar and Susan mentioned in their participations, we decided to work on 4 main topics specifically. We have the first one, which is good manufacturing practices. For us, and as INVIMA, this is one of the main priorities, and it's one of the main needs of the country. And I think that we're still owing Colombia to work on this. We've owed them for several years, because what we currently do for certifying medical device manufacturers is focused on general requirements of our main decrees for medical devices and reagents, and also of some standards and specific requirements of the pharmaceutical industry, especially for medications, but we didn't have good manufacturing practices that were specific for these type of products. And I believe that it is a need that the country had and that has felt, so that we can ease the trade, we can improve our exports, and we can increase the sanitary status of Colombia. Another one of our priorities is the following, because we understand that as a reference agency, we need to be assessed by the World Health Organization. And so this is a really important point for evaluation in the global benchmarking tool. As you know, this is a tool that measures regulatory systems and the capabilities of the regulatory agencies worldwide. Today, we are a level 4 area for medications, and we are about to get a tool which is currently scoring us. And this category will also include medical devices. So we are getting ready to prepare ourselves for the next part. And so that is why we are so urgent in working in these topics. Obviously, the emergency use authorization topic is something that we're also working on as a government, so that we can cover the future pandemic. I mean, so that we can just work and give the Colombian people medical devices that are of quality. And for good clinical practices, that's also another need that we see that has come out, not only because of what was seen throughout COVID, which occurred with different, when we had different initiatives, but because we had an increase in presenting research protocols with medical devices in the country. So came a moment where we said, okay, this is interesting. The Colombian market is getting more and more interested in making up new technologies and creating new technologies. And well, we are receiving this type of requests in INVIMA. This is a chapter that we also have that we have to still manage because it's part of the agenda, you know, with the World Health Organization. And of course, we also need to update the main decrees for medical devices and in vitro reagents that were issued several years ago and that need to be adjusted based on the new market conditions and new regulations per se. What are the advantages of this participation and in these work sessions that are interinstitutional? Well, the first advantage, and I believe the most important one, is to contribute to the development of regulations that will supply the needs of a country. So we do this, it has to supply or to substitute it from a point of view that will not only reduce technical barriers to trade, but that will also have an impact on regulations so that we can have a balanced regulation between the different actors so that we can have a regulation that will identify the strengths and the skills of the institutional capability of INVIMA, the Ministry of Health, and a regulation that will determine what are the nonconformities or the differences that the different stakeholders see in this regulatory framework. And I believe that with the work sessions that we've had, we are achieving this. These have been successful with all the work that we've done with the Ministry of Health, with the National Department for Planning, sometimes with even the trade, the Ministry of Trade, and always with the support of the project, of the MDRC project. So we've gained a lot of information and experience. And Dr. Lucia at some moment was telling you that as a project, we didn't have an idea. I mean, we had never done this first work that had to do with the impact of the regulatory aspect at this level. And I believe that the project and these tables have given us the opportunity to start with this technical experience regarding the implementation of standards, to understand and know who are the stakeholders that are involved in the development of a regulation, in identifying what are the gaps, the regulatory gaps that we currently exist in our regulations. And lastly, well, to be able to go to the work sessions, which have been quite satisfactory. I believe that from our directors, Lucia Ayala, a position, we have given it all the necessary importance and prioritize what is necessary there to develop this type of standards. We actually have one person dedicated exclusively to become like the coordinator now, like the person who is integrating all the different projects or the different work sessions that is making sure that we're making progress, because in reality, we want these projects to be successful. Challenges, yes, we found many challenges. For the Ministry of the Interior and of Health, there might be some challenges like analyzing and looking for a balance between trade regulations and health regulations to include new technologies in the Colombian market. You know, as part of INVIMA, this has been a huge challenge from the level of understanding and developing decision-making issues tree, you know, and not saying that we don't have the standards and blame that on not working, you know, so that we can understand that the problem is not that, it's just the lack of standards. And this leads us to the highest challenge, the largest challenge, that these assessments are going to be done or have to be based not only on the human resources, the financial resources, or the technology resources, or on some strategies, but that can be measured comprehensively to see what is the installed capacity, what is the institutional capacity. And in these assessments that we do in the work sessions, we can see that the things that we're building have the necessary balance in the pre-market and the post-market surveillance. And at the end, they turn out not becoming a load for the regulatory entity or for us as the executor of the standards, but that this goes hand in hand and is much more integrated so that we can really work with the market pre-surveillance aspect, with what is needed, and we can focus our work as a sanitary agency in the post-surveillance aspects and the control aspects. And so we have a new standard for medical devices, which has come about very recently here in Colombia. And right now we are reviewing the institutional capability that we have for technological resources. We have human resources also, and we also have all the strategies analyzed to accept this new regulation from the transition or of the support to the industry itself or to the different stakeholders that are involved. And while answering to this huge question, if reliance is considered in this type of regulations or not, the answer is yes. I mean, clearly, and I reconfirm that, as I said this morning, we are clearly striving on being part of this reliance. And we're only thinking that this should be considered as long as the co-responsibilities between the states that apply the reliance are very well defined. And as long as we have a good communication mechanism between the evaluating teams in the different agencies so that they can share the information and see what the criteria was, what were the solutions or the risks, and everything that happened during the management and the assessment and the risks. So why do we talk about co-responsibilities? Well, if you remember, at some moment we had a case with the mammary implants, where INVIMA assessed all the efficiency, the references that we had in the legal and technical documents that an importer wanted to bring these prosthetics into a country. And so based on that reliance and that trustworthiness, we reviewed documents that were supporting the quality and the security of those breast implants. However, things happen, like in this case of the breast implants, and at the end, locally, the sanitary agency or INVIMA ended up being the party responsible for this, for the quality aspect, which we didn't verify at the beginning, but we just trusted in the other documents. So reliance has its own specificities, and this is one of the aspects that we need to work on more in depth, and we have to include co-responsibility without any doubt. And so this was a brief summary of our participation as part of INVIMA. And well, if you have any questions, I'm here for any questions you might have. Thank you for all of your attention. Thank you, Mabel, for your presentation.
Now I would like to introduce Marta Lievano, who is part of the legal team of the ministry, and she's going to explain us the tool called Procedures and Processes approved by the Ministry of Health. Gracias, Marta. Bienvenida. Tienes la palabra.
Thank you, Martha. Go ahead. I pass the floor to you.
Buenas tardes. Efectivamente,
So good afternoon. And yes, I want to share my experience with you. I apologize because I'm a little bit sick right now. So I'm going to do a very short presentation, introduction, and then one of my colleagues is going to help me with finishing this presentation so that I'm not boring any of you with the worst voice that I have right now. No. Marta actually has COVID. So thank you very much for this huge effort. And we do know that Lorena is going to help you with that. So thank you very much for this. Yes, thank you, Susan. So, as I was saying, we want to talk about our experience in this whole process that has been supported from the Alliance. And this has been a quite enriching experience for the ministry.
Con el apoyo,
With the support, of the team, we managed to put together an instrument to help us fulfill regulatory practices in a comprehensive fashion. And when I say comprehensive, I'm talking about an instrument that caters both for external requirements, the international ones, and also domestic regulations. So my purpose here is to inspire you all to work on on an architecture that is similar to ours in your countries. One that I am sure will be very, very useful because it will help you gather, as I said before, to gather in one document, in one process, in one flow, to collect everything available in terms of regulations, standards, operational capacity within each of your countries, and how you go from one place to another, from one department to another, so that in the end of the day, you have a full administrative tool. In our case, for the Ministry of Health, this is an administration tool. This is a document that collects a step by step, covering each and every of the phases that need to be brought forward in order to fulfill the demands of national and international law. When we believed this would be a useful thing for us as a ministry, then we realized as we started working on it, it became much more than that. And when we believed this would be a particular case and that we were doing it only for our own benefit, then we were deeply surprised to realize that with this document, we're going to be able to do it and kind of customize it, but it can be used in other government departments in charge of administrative acts. And in Colombia, for example, it's all ministries who do this. And with slight adjustments, we can work through the Administrative Department for National Planning, DNP. With this, they will become operative for each government department. The truth of the matter is, we have already taken the first steps. The first big advantage is that this can be used for all government departments in the country. And again, I want to make this point. I would suggest you review the possibility of checking this and adopting this idea for your countries, because sometimes we tend to believe our countries are very different. But if you sit and review, you realize that this type of documents help you realize there are many requirements for certain things which are the same or at least similar, and that other countries have instruments, documents, and certifications that may be used or reviewed at once. They can be placed, let's say, in the same toolbox together, so that constructing and relations between nationals and foreigners can be built better. And this was the case. It was highly beneficial, and it was clear to us. For example, with the pandemic, when we all realized there were commonalities with the rest of the world. And as a result of those, if we viewed things from the same angle, we could work on it and we could process it much faster and swifter. So again, I encourage you to check this possibility at each of the countries of origin. And hopefully you can take this down to practice. Now I will leave you with Lorena Calderon, who will tell you how we work this, how what we identify as a challenge, and how by using this instrument we manage to get the results I mentioned. Thank you.
Todos. Yo voy a
Thank you,
tratar de
Dr. Marte. Good afternoon, everyone. I will now try to condense the ideas of Dr. Martha.
quisiera simplemente
And
comentar
to this end, I would like to start
pequeña aquí introducción
by
esos antecedentes abiertos
passing this
para
introduction of the background and risks identified
construirse más bien este instrumento.
to build this instrument.
Cómo
The challenge identify how it was structured and the benefits which it has brought to the ministry. And the background, I'm sorry if I don't want to overwhelm you with this many standards, but we have an administrative event with regulatory guidelines, which was prior to the possibility of making changes with this procedure and the support we've been receiving. This administrative act is fed by a series of national regulations, which has been structured with this with technical guidelines and being standardized at the national level. As Marta said, for these processes to be more fluent, standardized, and of course, much more transparent when it comes to putting together administrative acts. As you can see on the slide, there is a series of national regulations and also international regulations and guidelines. This makes it more interesting because the possibility of standardization is much wider. It's a more actual opportunity in this process. Similarly, with these standards and what we have identified nationally and internationally, we have found the need to update. We have identified that within the ministry there was a complexity in the paperwork, and this also arises from the differences in standards, which came from the lack of knowledge and lack of involvement from technical areas. And so this gave rise to the possibility of unifying these administrative acts. And of course, not knowing the stages and requirements to issue those. This background obviously makes it a risk, which is being clearly identified by the team in the international support we have received. And risks where insecurity that might arise by not knowing the standards or by an incomplete or only partial use of norms of standards, the lack of legal instruments, national, internationally, or not matching well, the possibility of litigation risks, as in the way of judicial actions or legal suits against this, and the lack of planning by technical departments. It is very important you know that the healthcare sector issues a series of administrative acts because of the volume of subjects regulated. So this lack of planning may affect deeply all this process that is efficient and effective.
Ah, ok, sí. Me excuso que siempre hablo muy rápido para el traductor. Voy a hablar, procurar hablar un poco más despacio. Entonces,
So,
después de esos antecedentes, riesgos,
with this background and risks identified,
el reto. ¿Cuál es ese reto?
we identified the challenge. And Dr. Marta mentioned already, it was putting together an instrument to collect all the national and international regulations to make it possible to have one clearer, more efficient and transparent procedure, one that is more practical for officials, of course, being created by the Ministry of Health, but with the possibility of being extrapolated to other sectors in the country. And as Dr. Martha says, for you to consider this in your countries, something that will help you support your internal process. So those were the challenges, background and risk. And then we have the preparation or change in administrative orders, which is already in our quality management system. We will go into the detail of this. But what is this supposed to mean? This is an auditable process, and that means it is much more strict to follow it up and to implement. And as I said before, with efficient follow-up, there is objective, scope, and a field of operation. There are steps. Dr. Oscar mentioned in his presentation with exposed and ex ante evaluations, regulatory agenda, which is regulations as such, and a cross-cutting element, which is public participation, because it is obviously very important because publicity of this will guarantee its transparency and the right involvement of every single actor in these regulations. We have to remember that most of the population is object of this regulation will participate in the environment of implementation, and therefore it is very important to have public participation. So we were talking about these characteristics of the process. Basically, it is composed of the regulatory agenda, planning, and we spoke about the lack of planning. Well, this regulatory agenda brings to a concrete footing the preparation of these regulations, impact analysis, and full normative analysis as it corresponds, exposed regulation analysis and public consultation, which, as I said before, materializes participation we have in these processes. I also mentioned we have managed to have this procedure as a part of the quality system, which additionally to internal and external audits with continuous improvement processes, control points, and this guarantees in a way that regardless of who is running the process, this will strengthen institutional capacity of the ministry or departments adopting it. Of course, it involves observing the international obligations of Colombia, which are appropriate for our users, and it incorporates recommendations made by World Health Organization in terms of regulatory convergence. And not going in depth, but one of the most important areas of this is that the document is the result of a collaboration and synergy work with the work team of the MDRC and the National Planning Department, the Ministry of Trade, and the Administrative Department of Public Work, of Public Operations. But what is this? What does this mean? In closing this procedure, particularly benefits that it will bring about as legal departments, and of course, as a part of the health department. So first of all, in securing or providing legal security of these acts and procedures. There are standardized processes for the purposes of legal actions. And in order to have the all of this well organized and properly, that we have the right planning and prioritizing of topics led by the sector, and then making make a publicity of all these components of the health and social security systems. And finally, for the document will be used by the National Planning Department for all government departments in the country, and and the possibility of using it in further programs and plan. I am sorry to speak if I speak too fast, and I tend to give a hard time to interpreters. I hope it was clear. Thank you, Lorena, and all of the team, Oscar, Mabel, Marta, wishing you recovering soon. Let's now open the floor for questions and answers. Are there any questions for Colombia, for any of the speakers? Go ahead. Would you use the microphone, please, so that you can be listened to?
¿Sí me escuchan?
Can you hear me? Okay. I will make a comment in Spanish for the benefit of our Colombian partners. More than a question, it's a comment from from USDA to thank you for the partnership and participation in the project, and also to encourage you to continue working with us. It is what 1.5 more years left in the project, so we want to encourage you to use technical assistance in as much as possible in the provision to this coalition, and so that at the end of this we can celebrate together huge progress in strengthening your institutional work. Thank you. Next.
Hello, thanks again for your presentation. Tammy Storwald from Roche. I have a question because I thought I heard you mention that you'll be going through the GBT plus assessment here soon. And my understanding of the GBT plus is that a lot of work remains to be done in order to make sure that that tool is appropriate for medical devices. We have provided feedback to the WHO and others to try to help evolve that tool so that it is based on foundational principles for medical devices and not so much pharmaceuticals. So I was just curious to see if I heard you correctly and if you could help me understand. Thank you.
Sí, 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 escuchaste bien.
Yes, you heard correctly. We are starting to evaluate where we are standing on this. The experience has been for medication, now for GBT plus, and including medical devices. We will start doing it. And so what we have done is performing an evaluation on ourselves for each of the models in the tool and see how we're doing, what kind of indicators we are fulfilling, which others we are not, if it's a matter of regulation or what we need to work on, whether this is an internal issue in terms of processes from INVIMA. So we are kind of looking ahead to the point we will be evaluated. That is what we're doing right now.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Soy Jorge Daniel de...
Hi, my name is Jorge Daniel from Mexico. First of all, I want to congratulate you because having an opportunity to harmonize in order to accelerate procedures and obviously to be able to provide a better response in this administrative act. This is something we all want in Latin America. But my question is as follows. How much have these exercises resulted in alleviating paperwork and making it faster and swifter? There is a big challenge in Mexico with COFEPRIS, so looking at the possibility of updating regulations and having the procedures to digitalize and as a consequence to simplify administrative processes. I think that's huge progress, but in the end of the day, we need to know whether there are results in response times for established industries. And as a consequence of this, to make this more useful so that all this paperwork and applications and permits are made swifter to get these devices faster into the market and helping patients? Have you seen a direct impact in response times? Thank you.
No sé si Oscar o Mabel sigue, por favor.
Go ahead, Mabel. I think this is something we will see as soon as we start seeing the results in updating our standards. Of course, there are some previous experiences in terms of updating our device decrees, and this helped us automate some s- some paperwork time, and this has had definitely an impact on how long it takes to issue these authorizations. In fact, if I remember correctly, in 2018, we were evaluating this or handing the permits between 12 months and 13 months. Today, after the implementation of this decrease and in reviewing our institutional and operational capacities, we are delivering this before that. So the wider experience is that regulation helps, of course. And if you add to this with the support of greater installed capacity, then it works in terms of time. But out of the things we're working right now, we mentioned some of the times we have say kind of part of a project for this regulation, but the actual result is to be seen in the future. Oscar, I don't know if you could share something, but in this time we could not speak about current benefits already in terms of time because of the conditions of projects. Well, yeah, precisely by knowing how some products are being made. I mean, for how long it takes to issue a sanitary registration number, and as a government, how long it takes to us. So that's going to be one of the points we're going to have: institutional capacity for ex post evaluation, and that is going to be incorporated in the regulatory proposal. So I would think our hope is that we will be able to meet the timing. So that's something we're doing right now. And I'd say part of the things that bring a high impact when talking about paperwork and availability and supply of medical devices. So how long it takes to make the registration, etc. So I think this is the time in which we can start evaluating. And I think in principle, we don't have the results yet because it's early into the process, but those are some of the points that we will evaluate. Oscar, and I would like to mention that as a part of the implementation process of good regulatory practices, there is a very important step, which are analysis criteria that will enable regulators to choose the way forward. And a part of this criteria is how much, what the cost will be for regulators to take one or the other, but also how much it costs to regulate. That's a part of the importance to conduct all this process and not to have the analysis once the regulation is already projected. Marisol, if you could use the microphone. Thank you. I just want to make a general comment on the importance of following the learning curve in the public and private sector. So this process has meant We all have to train ourselves in this new dynamics and new methodology. And I think a permanent communication between both parties has been and it is fundamental. Not only do I have to thank the project, the structures of project, USA, and also the national government, which has been open and really patient because they have been trained and retrained on some things that usually would take longer time to issue an opinion and to observe the standards or the drafts or decision trees and concepts. So I think this active participation is fundamental. And if time were more flexible, we could get to this in terms of strategic regulation, like including changes in health regulations for and medical devices. It was just a comment. Thank you. Any further comments? All right.
Sí, tenemos una manito levantada.
Yeah, I see a hand up. There you go.
Doctora Lucía Ayala, siga, por favor.
Dr. Lucia Ayala, go ahead. Thank you very much. Regards. Also, in responding to question about regulatory times and paperwork, Colombia is one of the countries with the shortest timing because authorization for low risk device are automatic. They are issued in 1 week. And as Mabel said, the ones that require ex post analysis, we are improving in times. We're down to 3 months, and in the region, we are fast in terms of giving access to patients to new technologies, and all changes, which are changes to trade marketing authorization, they are automatic. So that means, of course, we may have challenges and some improvements to make a concern compared to the models of other countries. For example, we say we will not give these authorizations to low risk. So that is one less of a paperwork. And I think the US is doing something like that. I'm not an expert in other countries' legislation, but we would be susceptible to that. Why? Health authorities from health authorities themselves. We don't want to be seen as a window for paperwork. We want to be seen as public health surveillance and follow-up agency. And the new government, for the new government, that's what we want in the Ministry of Health, to have this emphasis and be seen like this. So at this moment, there is a better environment, so we are not perceived as a paperwork agency taking forever to conduct these licenses and permits. We want to be seen instead as a government department in charge of public health, and I think that is an answer to your question. Those of you who don't know Lucia Ayala, she is the director for medical devices and other technologies from INVIMA. It's not a question. I just want to congratulate Colombia from Chile, from the National Association of Medical Devices. We are sending a word of congratulations to the work being done in Colombia. Well, congratulations, Colombia. Then we're closing the Colombia panel to continue with our agenda. Thanks to our panelists, and we'll be back with you tomorrow. Hopefully you continue connected, because our intention is to share experience from every country and also have your feedback to continue improving these processes. Thank you. Well, as we can see, the work being done in Colombia, they're working really hard and deeply. And getting to Jorge Daniel's comments, the results in terms of how and when, the critical point to make sure those results of greater efficiency in the use of resources and effectiveness in results definitely has to do with the way good regulatory practices are followed and implemented. And as they are doing in Colombia, they are now evaluating regulations they had already, as we heard, exposed, which means what kind of results were obtained as compared with the results originally presented when developing regulation the way it is now. And from those results, then to produce regulation ex ante, which will imply the analysis of how we are to regulate now. Are we going to maintain what we have because it was bringing about the results we wanted and the conditions remain in place to maintain it, or whether we need to do something different? And one thing we are seeing, and it was the pandemic that made us more, made it more obvious, is that the answer to many of the challenges we have in the world, not only as a private industry, but also as regulators, will be solved by implementing reliance mechanisms. In theory, that is what we expect to see. Now we are to prove, as our Colombian colleague said, by conducting regulatory impact analysis, which has to incorporate every single variable related to executing a regulatory document, and which has to do not only with how much it will cost the private sector to fit this regulation and whether benefit justifies the cost. And equally important, the question we need to answer is, does the regulator have the right capacity? Do they have the right resources in order to operate this updated regulation or this additional regulation piece with resources at hand? Because all of a sudden we encounter the fact that we are in the face of situations when we want to regulate a new field, particularly in medical devices. With the speed of innovation, it is very frequent that we have to go into new areas to innovate. And if we don't perform a full analysis to say, this is my current capacity today at 100%, do I have the capacity to regulate this one from scratch as a new field? Or what do I need to do so, but if I don't have the opportunity? Because the reality is that most countries don't have the facility to improve installed capacity. So the question is, what am I going to do differently to help my operation become more efficient and apply this new regulatory piece in the most effective fashion? So it may seem like a long, complex process, but the question is, it is worth conducting it exhaustively so that the end result in the end of the day will mean we have the results and the products we want and the way we need them to guarantee patients, safety and security, and as the World Health Organization recognizes, but identifying and recognizes how far regulators can go, what their capacity is in the end of the day. So with this extended wise approach, to see how far I'm going to go in the way I regulate and close this. This is in bringing these questions and where we're going to get with regulatory convergence. Well, this is exactly it. By using mechanisms to guarantee quality and performance of medical devices and make them more effective, so that patients can have access to them, so that governments in their public health programs can include those medical devices. We are very optimistic of the result we are to get. And in the case of Colombia, we are very optimistic because, as they said, the level of commitment and interrelation they have established with their institutions that have a word to say in order to implement this. We congratulate you for the work you're doing, and I'm sure in the next few months we're going to see very concrete results in practice. With this, I would just like to give you some word of introduction of the results we are getting. And when we're getting, can we close this presentation? I'm sorry. We're going to talk about Mexico, Peru. Then we're going to have a more fluent conversation with the FDA and Anvisa. So let me share this with you. Say part of the findings we have had together in implementing the project. And as I said before, I think most of you were present on Sunday. From the training sessions we have had for Mexico, we have identified that both COFEPRIS and the Mexican Pharmacopoeia are both have regulatory responsibilities. They did not have a procedure or a process to enable to guarantee fulfillment of international practices as are related to regulatory practices. And after months of negotiations to get this, the conclusion was that they don't have the resources to do it by themselves. So they requested support from the project. And with this, we made a checklist that is in the process of review both by the Pharmacopoeia and COFEPRIS, including all international and local obligations as compared as related to good regulatory practices. This checklist includes obligations, international obligations of Mexico, because they're a signatory of the agreement to the Treaty of the U.S. against technical blockages on trade, but also a particular chapter on medical devices and the obligations established at the Pacific Alliance. This is internationally speaking. And also locally with the law of regulatory improvement. So in the next few weeks, we expect to have the final version of this checklist, which the moment a new regulation is issued and the moment one is to be updated, one that in the Mexican framework is called NOMS, or for Pharmacopoeia to include a new chapter on a new area to regulate or updating some of the monographies or some of the annexes of Pharmacopoeia to be done, making sure all these international and national obligations are fulfilled. So in this sense, the process is different. COFEPRIS will include it as the Colombian Ministry of Health has included in their quality management system through a normalized operation procedure, and Pharmacopoeia, which is regulated by NOM 001. They will have to prepare their update process with all of the process of good regulatory practices. So this is what we are at with COFEPRIS in terms of fulfillment of international obligations. And in the end of the day, in the mid and long term, and I say mid and long term because processes, as Daniel said, are not short processes. We don't want them to be urgent, short processes that will not enable them to be done exhaustively enough. The reality is that in the mid and long term, every time there is a piece of regulation to fulfill all those processes, and then the final result will be aligned to international practices. And this will guarantee that processes, when it comes to reviewing, will be more agile because there will be no exception conditions. And with this, we are preventing the possibility of having regulators as a part of this and the dissemination we may make to save them from being at a position of risk at the World Trade Organization for not fulfilling these international obligations. On the other hand, though, We're working with the Directorate General for Standards, sharing them some proposals we have for them to be included in the regulatory framework for the regulatory improvement. We will be sharing this with you in the next few weeks. And having said all this is based on training sessions we have held with them, because in the end of the day, in as much as we can all speak the same language, then we will be able to be more agile in improving the things we have producing. These are the most meaningful interactions we've had, basically with the regulatory quality analysis. And this year, we held the triannual review of all procedures connected with medical devices at the GMI. And these procedures are to incorporate requirements established in regulation to have the approval of medical devices. And it is in this sense, and the things we've been doing in working with local groups is to provide the feedback so that through these procedures, the right adjustments can be made in order to align requirements of Peru to international regulations. Peru represents, and this is what I would like to close, the updates for Mexico and Peru. I don't know if there are any questions. Okay, thank you. So at this time, I would like to invite Melissa and Augusto to come up to the panel to have a more detailed conversation on how these two regulatory agencies have been helping in the work we are doing to develop capacity in order to have this better aligned. So over to you. Just a second, we are missing one microphone.
Thank you, Melissa. So I think that I'd really like to
Bien.
start with you, Melissa, sharing how has it been the experience for the US FDA in regards of the support that you have provided to the MDRC project? If there are any particular recommendations that you would like to make to the project, may we improve it? I mean, what we're doing for us to be even more effective on what we're doing. And of course, again, what can we do to help?
Lots of loaded questions. So certainly we've been happy and pleased to support the project. As we expand our team, we'll have more ability to do so. We've been trying to do it and stay afloat with our small little team of 3 of us. I'm looking forward to the future where we'll have the opportunity to do more of this. We, of course, even with the small team, we saw the value and the importance of doing these efforts. And we've been supporting, for those that aren't aware, we've been participating and helping shape some of the agendas for these webinar sessions on sort of hot topic areas with respect to, you've heard us talk about things like standards, for example, and conformity assessment, a lot of basic information, sharing our experiences and our challenges as a larger regulator, really to enforce the fact that we struggle even as a larger regulator to deal with some of these challenging issues. And of course, reliance is always a part of those conversations as well, which will continue to do so. I think obviously one of the challenges is that everything had to be virtual. And so I think that certainly presented a challenge, but I would also say positive in a sense, because I think we were able to get more attendees at a lot of these sessions. You heard some of the numbers that, Stephen gave and Sandra gave, where we had hundreds of people online for some of these training sessions. If we had it in person, I don't know that we would have hundreds of people with travel restrictions for different governments and trying to get to different places. So thinking about that in the future is how do we do some of this moving forward as a combination of the two? Thinking about virtual options as well as, some in-person work. So I think that's one of the areas. One of the challenges too we've also encountered is I think a lot of countries are interested in the bright, shiny object, right? They say, oh, the hot topic areas are CMD and AI and cybersecurity, and we want to know about these issues. No, it's take 20 steps backwards, and we need to start thinking about how do you classify a medical device? How do you review it? How do you deal with post-market safety? And so I think far too often they're focused on what the hot topic is, as opposed to thinking about what the foundational aspects are that they need to be aware of, that they need to ensure that are implemented appropriately. And so I think that's one of the challenges. I think we've all seen it, right? And that's the first thing they want to talk about, CMD. And we say, no, we really don't want to get into the details of that. We did in one case, talk a little bit from a very high level perspective about the challenges with CMD, knowing that there were some other issues ongoing, that it would kind of help reinforce the message that they can't do these activities. It's a challenge to do those. But I think those are sort of my initial thoughts right now. I don't know. Thank you.
So can I speak in Portuguese now?
Por supuesto que sí.
Okay. Eu estava querendo falar em português já há muito tempo.
I have been wanting to speak in Portuguese for a long time, so I will take advantage of this opportunity.
Primeiramente, eu queria
So
parabenizar.
first of all, I would like to congratulate not only the coalition, but also the authorities that have been involved in this process because of the a deep thought that has been given to it. Because from what we've been seeing from the presentations, it seems to me that it's something that has been taken very seriously with a lot of property by the authorities. And so I would like to take advantage of this moment to share a little bit of the experience that we've had in Brazil concerning the impact analysis in regulatory affairs and also the simplification of the processes. So during the presentations, I took notes of some of the things that I've noticed, and Anvisa is also involved in the application of the tool by WHO, the global benchmarking tool. And this has been a huge challenge for our agency. It's not a simple task to be conducted. So we have identified several issues that need to be improved. Other than that, we have a presidential executive order that obliges us to simplify regulations so that the life of the industry, of the productive sector is simpler, instead of creating new regulations that create new barriers. So we have gone through a process over the last 2.5 years to simplify all the regulations, all health regulations that are applied by Anvisa, not only for medical devices, but all other products that are regulated by the agency. And so that created consolidated regulations. So today we have concise and simpler regulations. They are easier to be understood by the sector, and so they eliminate certain barriers and also eliminate older regulations, regulations that are not effective any longer. Within this process, we have determined then that every new regulation that would put another requirement in place, it should go through a regulatory impact analysis. So that has to be an extensive report and study, just like you mentioned, Sandra, evaluating the costs, not only for the public sector, but also for the industry, for the private sector, for the users, and even for the patients that depend on that type of device or product. And of course, there are exceptions. So when we talk about the advantages of using regulations by the MDRC or international regulations, there is some sort of flexibility when we do the impact analysis, because you're internalizing some international regulations. So they have a solid basis, a way of working in the international arena. So that allows us to have a faster and simpler regulatory impact analysis. So that becomes more agile for us. One last thing that I would like to comment on and that I would like to highlight is regarding training. Training in the internal and regulatory agencies. We conduct internal courses at Anvisa regarding regulatory impact analysis. And I would say that 50% of our technicians that conduct the analysis of products have some sort of minimum training in impact analysis. So we see that the process is generating benefits not only for the agency, but the society as a whole. So that is something very interesting to be following up on. And those were my comments. And I would like to say as well that I had been talking with Leticia recently, and Anvisa was not so actively participating at the coalition, but that is one of our goals, to broaden our participation and collaborate with the initiative.
Oh, we can probably
Yeah.
do it now. So Veronica, thank you. Yes, so Leticia, if you can help us sharing.
Boa tarde a todos. Eu sou Letícia Fonseca, eu sou
Good
vice-secretária
afternoon. I'm Leticia. I'm a deputy secretary at the coalition in Brazil. It seems that we have matched our presentations, you know, Augusto and I.
da Anvisa.
But I would like to say that Anvisa's participation in our project of Coalition for Regulatory Convergence of Medical Devices has been going on through experience sharing and knowledge.
Que eu destaquei
And so the points that I would like to highlight are the good regulatory practices, something that has been adopted since 2008, and that has improved
da
and
participação
allowed the participation of different stakeholders and acting in the sector.
A Anvisa também deu uma resposta muito rápida.
Anvisa has also given, provided a fast response to COVID. So in March 2020, we already had the extraordinary procedures.
Para o combate da Covid.
And so that allowed us to fight COVID and used tools as analysis, prioritization of analysis, reliance, and also the use of products without regulation if they were already marketed in other countries that were part of the IMDRF. Another thing is the use of international references, and that has been considering the IMDRF, and they have been loyal to it. And also the simplification of procedures and a market control based on risk.
Hoje em dia, já há alguns anos, né, existe a notificação de produtos.
So we already have the notification of products for low risk, class 1 and class 2 products. That's a fast procedure. The company does that online. It does not go through a detailed analysis by Anvisa. And also the establishment of the changes for the registration of products. And we've seen that present in action plans in different countries, and we have discussed with each and every association, and we debate that with the authorities. So Anvisa has a very interesting baggage to show when we talk about good regulatory practices. So Anvisa is responsible for the process of regulation end to end. So it's different from other countries where you have the knowledge in one area and an organ that is responsible is from a different area. So what I have done here is to summarize some of the collaborations that Anvisa participated in and themes where they were able to share their experience and their knowledge. So we've had Anvisa participating in the project of the ISO 13485, MDSAP, the product from Abyss. So they were talking about regulatory practices. Also in the international workshop by Aladiv, we've also had the participation by Anvisa, as well as at the webinar in Mexico of again at Aladiv's workshop. And we also had Anvisa's participation at an event that we hosted together with Indonesia, focusing on good regulatory practices and medical devices, with preclinical and clinical test evaluation of medical devices. And here is a table that shows the participation of the technical staff. So we've had the participation of Anvisa at different events that we host, and their total participation amounted to 117 events. I'm very proud of Anvisa, not only because I have worked there for several years, but also because I recognize their managerial ability. The ability of the staff is excellent. Sandra was commenting with me yesterday that she was surprised to find out about the staff taking care of pre-market surveillance. It's been conducted by 50 people, and it's an excellent work, and I'm very proud of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leticia. So, congratulations.
Bom, eu me sinto muito orgulhoso também porque a
I'm
Letícia
also very proud because Leticia was my first boss at Anvisa. So I'm very fond of her, and I'm very proud of her.
And you know, I mean, it is great also, I mean, to have this opportunity to continue to collaborate in completely different environments and having and bringing the trust that you built many years ago to a new way of relating. But I mean, that is great. But something that we have experienced and really enjoyed is, while building new relationships and develop the trust from the very beginning, as this is a critical component for you to succeed on whatever you do. That has happened, of course, with the US FDA, but we had a great background because we had a long-lasting relationship with AdvaMed and in many different types of collaboration. So we started from a history of trust, and the same with Anvisa, with what's happening in here. And of course, we have been related to both COFEPRIS and INVIMA and the Ministry of Health, but they were kind of like different. And with Colombia, it has really been outstanding how the trust has grown so fast, because they're just few months, and how the trust has grown and how it really contributes for a much more fluid and effective process and way of doing things. And at the end of the day, to deliver the results, to deliver on the commitments that all of us had made. So I think this is really something great, and we're very, very grateful for that to being happening. In probably now getting back a little bit on the topic of reliance and how all what we are doing, it's really kind of like based on how do we help in this particular case the MDRC countries to further accelerate the implementation of Reliance. But for that to happen, what I see that some of us are struggling, and I start by myself, I confess, is that I think that we have kind of like different understandings on what Reliance is. How do we start implementing Reliance? How all these competing priorities can help us focus on better, faster, more effectively implement Reliance. Would you like to comment something on that? I mean, how do we choose this Reliance topic? How do we have a better common understanding on that? Do you think that we could start applying Reliance for all these hot topics on software, medical device, and artificial intelligence? Or should we go to the basics and start applying Reliance to the very basic day-to-day activities that a lot of agencies are already struggling with? So what your thoughts would be in this regard, and based, of course, on your experiences?
For Anvisa, as eu vou falar em português, desculpa.
I'm going to speak Portuguese. For Anvisa, when we started dealing with Reliance, we had the beginning of this process was almost like an obligation. It was an absolute need because of the pandemic. It was something that was predicted. We wanted to do it, but it was something that seemed further than it was. And with the pandemic, it became a priority, an obligation that we had. If we didn't adopt that concept, we would have collapsed. There would have been a collapse in the analysis of all medical devices because it would not be feasible. From the point of view of beginning this process, we ended up beginning this process with a lot of high-risk products, respirators, for example. It was something that we didn't think of having a Reliance mechanism from the get-go. But given the urgency and the need for that, this was something that was our first step. But it was a very interesting process because it allowed us to create trust in other regulators, knowing that we could really use that information to start our product registration. It's like you said, we should start with baby steps. So our first steps with maybe low-risk products, simpler issues. And it's something that if we have the possibility of doing gradual work and growth, I think that would be ideal. It is ideal. However, for Anvisa, and I believe that Colombia has the same situation because of the presentation that I saw, low-risk products today, even though, I mean, they're already as simple as possible, they are modified. So Brazil had to have this attitude a few years ago of dealing with low-risk products in a direct process, because there was already a very tight operational capacity. So the plan for Anvisa today is to use the Reliance mechanism for medium and high-risk products. But I would say that if there is capability and availability, the possibility of growing slowly would be the ideal mechanism.
I got maybe half. So I guess I think, from our perspective too, I think, we agree you have to build a lot of confidence and trust with the regulators. You have to build those relationships. It's important to be able to have them trust you, trust what you're doing, understand what you're doing as well. And so that's honestly a big part of our jobs, right? So it's having to establish the relationships, gain the understanding of what our agencies are doing. You see it even with the more developed regulators are involved in IMDRF, for example. We've built the relationships up, and that's why we have the successes in exchanging our policies and practices. But when you look at these regulators and you just say point at, oh, we'll use GHF founding members as your reliance model. Well, do they have any way or access to gain that information? Do they have any contacts to get an understanding of what those processes are? So, we have been trying, again, why we see the value in a lot of this is trying to establish those relationships, trying to build the confidence. I know, for example, in the IMDRF meeting in Sydney that we just had, Singapore talked about the reliance mechanism that they were doing with Thailand. And, we had some conversations with our colleagues from HSA, and they said it took a long time, a lot of meetings to build the trust and confidence. And once they trusted us and they had confidence in our processes, we finally made some progress on getting that reliance model set up. And so I think that's a key part of it. It's not only the education, but establishing the relationships and contacts as well. And from a risk perspective, yes, I think it is really looking at the basics first, starting at baseline, and how they may be able to rely on those assessments that are done from other regulators as well.
Thank you. And it's interesting, in terms of developing the trust among regulators, what do you think that could be, or what do you see that could be kind of like the key success elements for that trust to be built? And probably it's kind of like a tricky question, but
exactly.
but that's very important. I mean, how can we accelerate, if it is possible, the building of the trust? Because at the end of the day, I mean, it's like first element, as you were saying, this is the first element in order to get into true reliance. So it is not only process-wise, it has a lot more to support that and to be able to implement that.
It's funny because some of the discussions we had in the IMDRF meeting as well is really thinking about ways that we don't seem very, exclusive. Like, we know that countries are trying to figure out ways to establish their systems, ways to rely on IMDRF documents, but we can't also be such a closed door group that, we can't allow others to be able to engage in it. So we've been talking as a management committee about a different type of membership, how we can further engage regulators that are developing their regulations so that they have the opportunity to engage with the IMDRF management committee so they can ask us the questions. What do you mean by this particular document? How have you implemented it? And so we're really trying to think about ways of opening our doors. Of course, we can't accept everybody in the categories we have right now. There's pretty rigorous requirements to become an observer or a full management committee member within IMDRF. And quite frankly, we've had it that way for a reason. We want to maintain that rigor. But how do we engage others? And so we're thinking about an affiliate membership program, much like we did under the MDSAP program. And then trying to figure out ways to carve out time within our IMDRF meetings where those regulators have the opportunity to engage with us and slowly build those relationships that are necessary so that they can come and ask us any questions they'd like to.
Yeah. Well, that's the point. I think that eu vou falar em português de novo.
I'm going to speak Portuguese again.
Augusto wants you to get only half of what he's saying.
In Spanish instead? Bueno, yo lo entiendo, pero en portugués no tanto como media vez.
Portuñol, entonces.
Portuñol.
É mejor assim.
Mas, então, de fato, é um processo que...
So yes, it is a process that takes time. But with the possibility of having meetings where we can understand how the regulatory process of another agency works, this really allows us to get that knowledge, to understand it works this way. And the agency itself may also present their own way of handling the process. And eventually we can influence other situations. But from the moment that that process is being known by everyone involved, everyone who participates on IMDRF, whether it is as permanent members or observing members, little by little, I understand that the regulatory process is going to start taking the same shape. And maybe in the future, in the far off future, maybe we can have a regulatory process that is much more similar between our regulators, and perhaps one day we'll even reach the unique process of evaluation that we dream of.
From the team from Colombia, from INVIMA or the Ministry of Health, out of what we have been sharing here. Probably not. But now, as, oh, I don't know if someone is connecting.
De parte de Colombia.
Sí, Oscar.
No, pues de parte de Colombia, creo que muchas gracias por los comentarios y la.
On behalf of Colombia, we thank you for the comments and the feedback that we've received.
Oscar, ¿puedes hablar un poco más fuerte y más despacio porque no te estamos entendiendo? Gracias.
Creo que es problema de mi red. Muchas gracias por los comentarios. Es bueno
So
saber
thank
que
you for the comments. It's good to know that all the regulators in the region understand.
No podemos.
Oscar, perdóname, pero seguimos sin entenderte y te quedaste
I
congelado.
apologize. The thing is that you got frozen, so we lost your communication. We apologize. Sorry, Oscar. There was a comment from Angelica who says single review -3. Don't know what it means, but that was what she put in the chat.
No idea. Okay.
Angélica?
Oh, it's a heart.
Oh, okay. So
Maybe he could type. I don't know.
Mabel, gracias.
Sí, gracias. Yo quisiera hacerles una pregunta.
Well, I would like to ask a question to you as experts and entities that have a little bit more of advantage in this path is how can you learn to trust? How can you achieve a very really successful reliance program if you're a sanitary agency?
Como confiar, né?
How to trust.
Bom, eu acredito que é como qualquer.
Well, I think it's just like any other relationship. First, you need to get to know them to then trust, and to be able to establish a information exchange mechanism. And this is something that exists at least within Anvisa. There are a lot of bilateral deals of sharing information, and this allows us to get to know how a different agency works, or how the reports are generated. And this little by little allows us to have a relationship that is going to happen gradually. And in some specific moment, if you know the way that that agency works, then you can go to a decision and you can choose to have reliance with that agency. Within Anvisa, we have a regulation. This is a foundation regulation for reliance that predicts a lot of requirements that should be met for us to be able to recognize the documents that are issued by a different regulatory agency. But in some cases, given the relationship that already exists, for example, inside IMDRF, is something that makes it easy for us and really shortens this process.
Thank you. Sergio, I think we have a question in here. Oh, sorry, and
Posso falar aqui? Agora sim.
Okay, now it's working. This is a question. What is the biggest challenge? Is it the political challenge or the technical challenge to accelerate the convergence process? What is the biggest block you see in this issue?
No obstacles.
Very easy.
Na verdade, eu acredito que o maior obstáculo.
Well, actually, I think the biggest obstacle is that in several situations, we have laws or decrees that are very difficult to be changed or amended.
Você depende de uma ação política.
So you kind of depend on a political action in order to change a law.
Falamos dos regulamentos.
However, when we talk about internal regulations, that is something simpler, not as easy, you know, that you could do overnight. Of course, it demands, you know, an impact analysis in some situations, or it demands a study in regards of what that could generate as an extra load of work, because we have limited resources, limited personnel. And so how is the staff able to absorb that new task, not only to generate the new regulation, but also to follow up on it? So I believe it's a little bit of both. Maybe the political part is not as important, but it is a barrier as well. And the technical barrier is the most difficult to be executed, I would say.
We have Daniel, Rosanna, and then Anna.
Thank you. You were talking about trust building. This project was designed and start implementation at a very unique and under very unique circumstances where we couldn't have that day-to-day interaction where we could sit across the table. And we launch our interactions and our outreach to governments in a virtual way. And now, you know, thankfully, and thanks to science and the work that, you know, companies like yours do in advanced, well, not like yours because you do medical devices, but to pharma companies that do, exactly. You do the syringes for the shots. But thanks to work, we're able to sit here. But there are probably, you already have a different view about that trust building. How much has your view changed from we need to be sitting here to build that trust to it's okay, we just can have a Zoom meeting? Is there like a magical, well, it's probably not a magical formula, but is there a good mix between virtual interactions and in person, or you just think as a regulator, you will never get to the point where you can have that trust building done through a virtual way, and you always need to be sitting side by side with your peers in order to build this trust that eventually is going to take you to reliance? Thank you.
I mean, I think from at least our perspective that there is still the importance of being in person for certain aspects of it. I think when you start initially working with a country, there is important value of actually being there in person and meeting that person. I'll take Kenya, for example, because, you know, we are looking at expanding the work in that region. It was very important to us to be able to meet Pauline, and we ensured that we met her in Sydney. We had meetings in Geneva. She was there. We had separate government to government meetings for a couple of hours, actually. Really good discussions. And we felt like we built the trust and confidence. And we are going to be helping MDRC and going in country to do some capacity building training, but that's going to be in combination with some virtual options, right? But I think from the initial stages, at least, there has to be that in-person aspect to establish relationships, build the confidence, build the trust, know the people, know the players, and then you move forward. I mean, I think, even in IMGRF, we all kind of know each other. We are at these meetings together. We've built that trust, we built that confidence with each other. But we can then have meetings virtually and it's no problem. But I think until you have at least those initial interactions, I think those are important to have face to face, honestly.
Thank you. Rosanna?
I'd just like to ask about, sorry, in my ear. Have you seen the situation where during COVID, because for vaccines, countries have to do reliance? There's no other way that they could evaluate vaccines in their own country. And so we've seen countries adopt reliance officially for vaccines. And then when they saw that it actually worked really well and saved lives, they started to ask us about reliance for in vitro diagnostics. And so that's, I think, a good opportunity. But it seems like you really are forced into it, like almost a blind date. And so I think we need to make better use of these opportunities. And with this momentum from the vaccine and from drugs for COVID, that they are starting to apply reliance to medicines as well in those countries.
Eu concordo absolutamente. I absolutely agree with you.
Ana?
I'm sorry, I have to say this in Spanish. I can speak slow for your understanding. ¿Cómo equilibra Brasil y México el tema del reliance versus la responsabilidad como servidores públicos que tienen? Porque en México lo que sucede y lo han manifestado a lo largo de todos los años los dictaminadores, ellos entienden que necesitan implementar mecanismos para hacer más rápida la dictaminación, pero por otro lado, y el reliance es una respuesta basado en la confianza y en la vigilancia postmercado y el análisis de riesgo, pero por el otro lado, en México hay una ley de responsabilidades de los servidores públicos con 42 artículos de la ley exhaustivos, en donde mencionan todas las acciones que tienen prohibidas. Y una de ellas es no trabajar, o sea, una obligación es trabajar de manera exhaustiva cualquier asunto que ellos tengan que revisar. Entonces, ¿cómo soluciona Estados Unidos y Brasil este tema y equilibran entre tengo la obligación de revisar de manera exhaustiva en pro de mi propio trabajo como servidor público y confío en lo que está haciendo, en este caso, el regulado para poder sacar un procedimiento más rápido?
Bom, no Brasil, eu acredito que
In Brazil, I believe that the principle of the public servant is the same. So you have the obligation to conduct that type of evaluation with all the depth that it's concerned. But the reliance mechanism doesn't really go against that principle. The reliance mechanism is something that is adopted by the agency and also maintain the deep assessment of that certain topic in any kind of circumstance. So the agency will conduct some sort of analysis by a reliance, considering an analysis that was conducted by another regulatory authority that has expertise in that theme and that generated that type of knowledge. So you will take advantage of that information that already worked on information, so to speak, so that your work is more agile. So that does not mean that it's going to be a second hand or a second category or insufficient type of information. And nonetheless, the agency has to maintain the surveillance over that product that is being marketed.
I think it is a matter of political will and interpretation. I mean, political will to properly interpret what it is established in the regulation. I mean, that would be my summary for that. And I think that I'm kind of summarizing a little what you have already mentioned. Yep. So thank you very much. I mean, it's really amazing how time flies when we're in these discussions. So just if there's anything that you would like to add, like closing comments, I do have a couple of challenging questions, but I'll reserve them for tomorrow morning. That we're all going to be fresh. So any final comment? No. I don't.
Eu acho que o principal recado é...
Well, I think the main message, the take-home message would be to keep on adopting good regulatory practices. The regulatory convergence is something very positive that has been shown very, very fruitful and positive for the agency that I work for. And so let's move on. Let's keep on working on that, because at some point, Reliance will be able to help us a lot.
A própria agência, como...
Not only our own agency, but also the patients. Just like we've already mentioned constantly here, the patient is our final goal.
Que todas as agências...
I encourage all agencies of all the regions here in the Americas have the intention and really pursue the good regulatory practices, the regulatory convergence, and in the future also Reliance practices as well.
Thank you.